Welcome back to the Mindful Hunter podcast. Got a bit of a special episode for you today, a bit of an extra episode for the week. I have a lot of good friends in Australia. I lived in Australia for 2 years, so I feel a pretty close connection to that country. And after what happened, a couple days ago, a good friend of mine who's Australian reached out and asked if we could do a bit of a special update on the podcast, just because people are taking advantage of this situation to yet again try and remove more gun rights, liberties, privileges from the population in Australia. And it's really unfortunate. And I think, we should all just do whatever we can to help. So we thought we'd put out a little bit of a podcast and just share with people some things they might be able to do to help. So, and remember, listen, if this is not your exact cup of tea, governments removing freedoms is a very slippery slope. It starts somewhere. The question is, where does it end? So even if this isn't something you feel very strongly about, just remind yourself there might be something one day that you feel very strongly about that you want allies and support for. So maybe let's all kind of stick up for each other in situations like that. So yeah, here's a quick update on the situation in Australia and maybe what you can do to help out. So, as always, thanks for tuning in, guys.
I just want to thank you for the opportunity to come on and sort of create an opportunity to help educate a lot of the Australian people, and help all the shooters, fishers, and hunters, outdoorsmen essentially, and even the non-shooters and that such. Give them a bit of awareness and hopefully take action through the right means of voicing their concerns, and also getting in touch with through their politicians, and expressing what they believe it should be done after this incident in Australia, in Bondi. So yeah, I was hoping to provide us shooters some information that they should go forward with in terms of engaging with politicians. I'd strongly encourage them to reach out to their upper and lower house members in the area, but also not only in their area, but in their entire state, and also engage with all the politicians at the federal level as well, which is very important. But do it in a civilized, polite way, because at the end of the day, we have to be smart about how we do this to prevent these restrictions. But for those in America, they're probably wondering what I'm going on about. As you know, in Bondi, there was that massacre the other day. Two individuals decided to murder a whole bunch of people because of their religious beliefs, which is ridiculous. And then coincidentally, one of them had a firearms license, which is very hard to get. But there is new information now coming out that they had applied for it years ago, but it collapsed because they never got their photo ID. And after a number of years later, they reapplied and were awarded it. And this was despite their son being on a terrorist watch list prior to it. And now there's just new information out that recently they just came back from a month in the Philippines at a terrorist training camp, apparently. So yeah, and then the automatic knee-jerk reaction of the government in Australia, both federally and state, is to strengthen gun laws, which is not right. So what I wanted to say, so I've written down as something I just wanted to write, to give people a bit of a heads up of how to engage with politicians when they do reach out. What I've got is in the aftermath of the Bondi massacre, we must reflect on what went wrong and what is working. With more than 30 years, the Australian gun laws have been safe and effective. However, unfortunately, the government and government agencies created to keep Australians safe and protected have failed in their duties. Law-abiding firearms owners should not be used as a scapegoat and punished as a result of incompetency and failures, as previously mentioned. Such changes to firearm laws will further create division amongst Australians and it's important to emphasize the emphasis needs to be focused on funding better anti-terrorism and better immigration measures, not gun reform. Every single firearms owner would agree that no one on a terrorist watch list should be granted a gun license. We all have a duty to oppose further gun reform via our members of parliament, as I mentioned, particularly regarding restrictions on how many guns we're able to own. When contacting state and federal politicians, it's important to remind them the following. Many license holders in Australia have a variety of firearms, all designed for specific and different purposes across hunting, competition, and target shooting. Possessing multiple firearms is justifiable as they are essentially essential for ethically and effectively hunting a variety of small and large game in Australia, which require different firearms. These firearms, however, are unsuitable for use in competition and target shooting, requiring alternative firearms designed for their given purpose. Furthermore, a single license holder may possess multiple firearms in a single caliber for several reasons, and it's important to highlight these reasons. One being firearms are suited one being firearms suited for youth shooters possessing a youth firearms permit uh, is one. However, because of this, they are legally required to have their firearms registered and stored with a guardian who possesses a firearms license. In addition, a significant number of law-abiding firearms owners also currently possess many antique and family heirlooms. These are just a handful of many reasons why we need to voice our opposition to any new restrictions on firearm ownership and the number of firearms we own. As I mentioned, I want everyone to remain calm, polite, and not to swear or abuse politicians. We must do this in a very smart and tactful way and work together, because if we don't, we're going to have a repeat of 1996, which I was around and saw what it did to the shooting community, the broader community. Now, like finally, just want to say that like hunting and shooting, we must remind them that hunting and shooting is a part of our identity, tradition, and culture. Meat from hunting not only plays an important role in feeding our families, but also important in bringing people from different cultures, religions, and backgrounds together who otherwise wouldn't intersect. It's building community, understanding, and love for each other. And now this is at risk. So finally, my last conclusion I want to say to everyone is it's really important to remember firearms owners are not a political football and statistically the safest people in the community. We oppose any restrictions on ownership as a way for politicians to avoid accountability for their failures. We need anti-terrorism and immigration reform. Stricter gun laws will only drive further division in our community. Australia needs to address the root causes. Otherwise, these events will continue to occur. So, yeah, I don't know if you have any questions, Jay, or not, but
Could you maybe, and we don't have to do a deep dive on this, but I don't think a lot of people know what happened in 1996. And I think maybe just giving a brief overview of that might highlight why there would be so much trepidation or anxiety around what could happen again, given the recent activities.
So in 1996, a guy called Martin Bryant, it was he went into Port Arthur in Tasmania and started shooting a whole bunch of people with SKS's semi-automatic rifles and such. And as a result of that, it was like a huge massacre. They brought in sweeping gun reform, I think within a day or two, which is very suspicious. And to this day, there's never been a coronial inquest, which is the equivalency of the highest investigation in Australia could be ever possibly done. And on top of that, they've recently prevented the release of any of that information or any investigation evidence for the next 99 years, which is strange. But he ended up in jail for life. And as a result, the gun reform from back then prevented anyone from possessing semi-automatic rifles or shotguns. Pump-action shotguns were banned. However, pump-action rifles were permitted. Safe storage, which no one opposes, was implemented. Licensing was implemented with different categories: rimfire, or centerfire. Handguns were more or less heavily restricted ban. So if you want a handgun in Australia, you have to get a H license, and you have to wait a year before you can ever buy one, and you can only ever use it at the gun range. In New South Wales, you're limited to 9 millimeters or lower. A lot of things that don't make sense. Every gun is registered. Upon applying for a gun license, it takes a month to get a gun license, quite some time, and then usually it takes a month as well to, if you want to buy a gun, apply for a permit to acquire your first one. I believe is like about 1 month, and then after that, every time you want to buy a new one, you have to place another. You have to enter for another permit to acquire. So it very, very heavily regulated. You know, if you have any previous history of violence, or that, you won't get a gun license. The gun license, don't want to oppose that. It's just like these new measures they want to bring in, like to restrict how many guns you own, is ludicrous. You know, they're focusing on an object as opposed to the people. Like, people are the ones who are committing these crimes. You know, statistically speaking, car accidents and drink driving kills more people in Australia each year than I think anything else. And with that logic, it would warrant, why isn't there heavier restrictions on drinking or driving? You know, if that's the way they're going to think. It's all about education and identifying problems. And in Australia currently, there's a lot of cultural tensions which aren't helping, and a lot of this is going unchecked. And unfortunately, a lot of Australian politicians are quite spineless and don't want to take accountability and are avoiding the root causes. So, yeah, sorry, that was a very long-winded answer, but
No, that helps. I think too, and we just kind of wanted to put out a quick message today, so we don't have to do a big deep dive. But the one note I want to make, because I think it's important to have allies, and I think, you know, the shooting population and the shooting community and the hunting community is a very, very small portion of the community as a whole. And so I'd like to also reach out to people, like maybe somebody passes this podcast along to you and you don't shoot or you don't hunt. But I would urge you to think about the things that you love doing and the freedoms that you love having, and the fact that something can occur unrelated to you, and the government can use that as a catalyst to remove freedoms that you previously had, or highly regulate things that you previously enjoyed a certain amount of freedom. And if we let this start happening, it's like that, you know, guard the gate mentality. It's like you got to draw the line somewhere where we should have a certain amount of personal liberties and freedoms. And if we start to sacrifice these based on fear-based arguments, it's like it's a very slippery slope, and your privacy can come under threat, your other liberties and freedoms can come under threat, and you would be hard-pressed to find a more responsible group than gun owners. And I won't go into, you know, I have some more comments, but I want to keep things.
It's correct. Statistically, you're correct.
100%.
And like this false illusion that there's no gun crime in Australia. Since 1996, there's been a huge growth in gun deaths and violence illegally. Like, handguns are so easy to get on the black market there. It's ridiculous. It's quite comical, really. And everyone's under this false sense of illusion that the laws did something, and like, no, it didn't. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. It's just important that these are currently the low-hanging fruits, and the non-shooters need to realize that, okay, while it might not be relevant to them, we're the first one on the chopping block, but that something they like or appreciate,
yes,
would be up next. And then they're going to complain and ask for help and go, we tried telling you this before, but you wouldn't listen. So everything I pretty much summarized so far in this podcast is important. So I just want everyone, just want to listen, please just contact your politicians and express your concerns and your opposition. I'm sure, Jay, in the notes you could have, I'm happy to provide like a template email if people want, or like summary points. And then I can even, for those in New South Wales, provide the list of all the emails of the people in the state parliament. I'm still working on the federal one, but I'm trying to help or get into contact with the guys at HAL, because I know they have those good petition software, like for
Hmm.
sending out emails. So I'm working on that too. So once I have that, I will share that, get people to share that.
Okay, excellent. Uh,
Thank you, Jay.
yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. So, everybody, check the show notes. And if you can, pass this podcast on to anybody that you think could help in the struggle, because I do think it's a worthwhile thing to spend a few minutes on. And thanks for prompting this and asking me for a bit of support, because I do, even though it's way over there, it hits pretty close to home, man. Like, it's this stuff
Yeah, I know.
happens in
Thanks,
Canada
man.
all the time, and it's like, yeah, it's and we were having a conversation the other night that hit very close to home, and you said, shooting is part of my identity. And that really struck me heavy, because it's not like somebody talking about an abstract tax issue or some weird school reform or something. You do feel a very personal attack when something that is such a big part of who you are as a person could be taken away from you through no fault of your own. And I think that's why people have such strong reactions. And I really respect your note about how you interact with these people. Getting angry, acting out, using offensive language isn't going to help everybody. So we need to have our voices heard, but do so in a respectful manner.
I 100% agree. And it's important that like we get on this fast because they will act fast. So the longer that we all delay, the worse it will be for us, and it might be too late. So, but yeah, I'd say I'd 100% agree with you. Just wanted to add that.
All right, everybody. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen, and enjoy the rest of your day.
You too, mate. Thank you so much.